Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you here at the Ukraine Crisis Media Center today. I would like to briefly make a quick run through today's schedule. At 12 o'clock, we are going to have Andriy Magera, the Deputy Chairman of the Central Election Committee of Ukraine. At 1, there's going to be Uliana Suprun, Director of Humanitarian Initiatives, Ukrainian World Congress. She's going to be accompanied by Christina Whaler, Canada-Ukraine Foundation, Artem Mirgorodsky, Chairman of the NGO Initiative E+, Nadia Golembievska, NGO Ukrainian Association of Specialists on Overcoming the Consequences of Traumatic Events. At 2 o'clock, we're going to have a change. Instead of Zoran Shkiryak, we had last-minute change to Vasyl Filipchuk, the chairman of the board of the International Center for Policy Studies. His topic of the briefing will be the presentation, Post-Referendums, Is There a Chance for Diplomacy? And at 3 o'clock, we're going to have a press briefing of the representatives of the battalion Azov, the National Guard of Ukraine. There will be speakers Yaroslav Gonchar, Deputy Commander of the Battalion Azov, and Mark Kursky, soldier of the Battalion Azov. The topic of the press briefing will be what really happened on May 9th in Mariupol. Доброго дня, шановні панове. Хотілося б оголосити розклад на сьогоднішній день. О 12-й у нас буде виступати Андрій Магера, заступник голови Центральної виборчої комісії України. О 1-й Уляна Супрун, директор гуманітарних ініціатив Світовий конгрес українців. Разом з нею будуть виступати Христина Валер, Канадсько-Українська фундація, Артем Миргородський, голова правління громадської організації ініціатива Є+, та Надія Голембієвська, Українська асоціація фахівців з подолання наслідків психотравмуючих подій. У нас відбулися зміни в розкладі, тому о 2-й годині замість пана Зоряна Шкіряка у нас буде виступати Василь Філіпчук, голова Міжнародного центру перспективних досліджень. Тема виступу буде після референдумів, чи є ще час для дипломатії. О 3-й годині у нас відбудеться прес-брифінг представників батальйону Азов Національної гвардії України. Учасники Ярослав Гончар, заступник командира батальйону Азов, та Марк Курський, рядовий батальйону Азов. Тема прес-брифінгу, що насправді відбулося 9 травня у Маріуполі. Дякую. Зустрінемося за хвилину.
Привіт знову. Я радий представити вам Андрія Магеру, заступника голови Центральної виборчої комісії України. Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen, or rather good afternoon. Yesterday's events and events over the last several weeks make all the state bodies that take part in the organization of the election process and the proper functioning of the bodies of state power in Ukraine, make us clarify our position about the events that happened. In my turn, I would like to say that first of all I'll speak about the referendum, and later I'll talk about the elections of the President of Ukraine. So about the referendums as such in Ukraine, I'd like to emphasize that Article 69 of the Constitution of Ukraine says that people's will is expressed through people's referendums and other forms of direct democracy. As far as referendums are concerned, today the law on all Ukrainian referendum of 2012 is in action, which provides for 4 kinds of referendums: the constitutional referendum, the ratification referendum, in part about the change of the territory of Ukraine, according to the procedure laid down in Article 73 of the Constitution of Ukraine, where the preliminary decision is taken by the Parliament. The third kind is legislative referendum, and the fourth kind of referenda is general referendum. The law of 2012 also recognized as non-acting anymore the law of 1996, and starting from 2012, Ukraine does not have any legislative act that regulates the organization and holding of local referenda in Ukraine. Also, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that according to the current constitution of Ukraine, Articles 140, 141, and the law on local self-government, the local referendum in Ukraine is a way to solve the issues of local communities. This means communities of villages and towns and cities. So there's no provision for the holding of referenda on the level of district or region, oblast, because there's no regional or district community in nature. So even though there is a law on local referendums, the creation of electoral commissions and polling stations and working on the lists of voters the day of holding the referendum and establishing the results of the voting, even when we have the law on the local referendum, the holding of any regional referendum in Ukraine is impossible, because this contradicts the constitution of Ukraine. It is not by chance that I am talking about the procedures that are extremely important for any referendum processes, because these procedures laid down at the legislative level allow to implement the principles of general law, of the secrecy of voting, of the access to voting, and also the freedom to express their will, not under the barrels of submachine guns. That's why it is not by chance I drew your attention to the principles of referendum processes in connection with all the procedures that a law on local referendums shall regulate. So I'd like to express here the official position of the Central Electoral Commission. The actions imitated by the referendum yesterday on the territory of Luhansk and Donetsk region have no relation to any referendum process and no way to express the will of the Ukrainian people, in particular in this part of the Ukrainian territory. So there are no legal results and effects of this referendum. So I think that this is more the issue for law enforcement bodies to clarify the question whether there were actions aimed at the toppling the constitutional organization of Ukraine, and I'd like to dwell in brief on the issues of organizing election process. In 22 regions of Ukraine and in the city of Kiev, we have all the constituency electoral commissions to hold the elections of the President of Ukraine, unlike Donetsk and Luhansk region. And we there have the 110 constituency in Luhansk Oblast and 8 electoral districts in Donetsk region, where the situation is more complex. In one of the constituencies there are not enough lists of representatives from candidates. In other places, armed men disrupt the sessions of electoral commissions. In some cases, the office equipment that belonged to electoral commissions was seized by armed people. So in 8 polling districts, there are no electoral commissions in Donetsk region. In some foreign media of eastern countries, there are statements that yesterday's actions were taken according to some lists of voters, but I responsibly say that in Luhansk and Donetsk, there are no lists of voters. The commissions did not receive those lists from the from the state register. Another fact about the TV debates, one of the candidates said that he asks voters not to vote for him. This is Mr. Zoran Shkiryak, and regrettably, certain biased information was spread that someone withdrew their candidature, but I can tell you that after the 2nd of May, there's no way to adopt the decision to cancel someone's registration, and this pertains not only to Zoran Shkiryak, but also to other candidates. The only case when the decision about the withdrawal of candidature is a very sad case. I don't want even to name it here, but you can guess. So in other words, any talk about cancellation of the registration of a candidate are not true. I have an information that some district electoral commissions were going to discuss the issue of stopping the rights and authority of representatives of Zoran Shkiryak, but I can tell you that there are 21 candidates for the presidency. They are all on the ballot list, and our voters can choose any candidate from this list in order to make their conscientious choice. So this is what I wanted to inform you about, and before I answer your questions, I'd like to know that I have in a soft copy, I have printed this out, some statistical information about the elections of the President of Ukraine, about candidates and trusted people and members of the Commission. I will pass this on to the organizers here, and they will have an opportunity to make copies for you so that you acquaint yourselves with it in more detail. And probably the last information, because I was asked about this as well, how many people applied for changing the place of voters. At the moment, it is 14.5 thousand people, and you can only change your place of voting before the 19th of May. If you are interested in the situation about people in Crimea and Sevastopol, more than 800 people from Crimea and more than 300 people from Sevastopol applied to change the place of their voting, so it is not more than 1,200 people from the occupied territories Crimea and Sevastopol. This is the picture as it stands today. I'm ready to answer your questions. Bogdana Kostyuk, Radius. Yesterday in Donetsk and Luhansk regions, they did not only hold the referendum on the creation of the Donetsk People's Republic, but there is also the so-called referendum organized by Mr. Kolomoisky. Do I understand correctly that this does not have any legal significance as well? Our site, Crimea Reality, is being addressed by Crimean Tatars and residents of the Crimea who are temporarily residing in western regions of Ukraine, and they say that they have some problems in registering for voting. I'll start with the second issue.
So talking about the citizens of Crimea and Sevastopol who have the intention to vote at the continental part of Ukraine, the Central Election Commission passed a resolution according to which, unlike other residents of Ukraine, the residents of Sevastopol and Crimea, if they do not change their permanent address, they don't have to submit any documents, any additional documents. They just have to submit an application about their willingness to vote. And if other cases take place, I would like to get this information, and we will react to that if people do not understand the law, maybe misunderstand the law. We will explain. We will explain how to correctly apply the law. Also, I would like to emphasize that any local referendum without the decision of the parliament on passing the law on local referendum a priori has no legal consequences on whatever issue it is, even if it is about identifying, even if there's some citizens of some settlements want to decide on whether the community should be divided into 2-3 communities. The idea on uniting certain administrative territorial units has the right to exist. It's an interesting idea, but at the same time this idea is to be first implemented is to be first included into the law on local referendum. The idea is not about violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine. I would like to emphasize it again. The idea in itself is of interest, but it is to be implemented according to the provisions of the law. But unfortunately, we don't have such a law. TV channel Ukraine. Our TV viewers ask if you are not in the voters register. I check it, I'm not there. I want to change the electoral address. I work in Kiev. I am registered in Donetsk. So what will happen? Do I have to go to Donetsk and ask there to include me into that list, and then I will come back to Kiev and only then will change the address for voting? I would like to mention there is a certain procedure. There are two ways of how to change the place of voting, whether these are the citizens of Odessa, Lvov, Donetsk, those who actually live in Kiev. What could be the reasons? The person could actually live in Kiev, for example, but could be registered in some other place. But this person, for example, works in Kiev, has some labor relations here with the company, every day goes to work, or a person studies in Kiev, a student who studies in Kiev has no registered place of residence in Kiev. or if a person is getting the medical treatment, such people, for them there is a different procedure. They could be included into the list of special polling stations at the hospitals. It's a simpler mechanism. There are cases when a person is on holidays in some spa place, for example. Well, not far from Kiev. And there are also some places where people can go for holidays. So this could be the reason why a person on the day of voting is not at the place of his or her residence. Of course, these are different cases, separate cases, but what can a person do in such a case? There are two options. The first option is the person goes to the body where the registration, where the register is, at the place of registration. For example, if the person is registered in Donetsk, the person goes to Donetsk and submits the application. Why? And they have to, the person wants to change the place of voting, but that's temporary change of place. And for that, the person has to submit a certain document. If a person studies, that should be the certificate from the place of where the person studies, or if the person works, there should be a certificate from the place where the person works. May I interrupt you? People know about that. That has been mentioned several times, and that's a story which we know about. But I wasn't included into the list of voters, even in the place of my permanent registration. I am not in the list of voters. My name is not there. How to change the voting address, we know already, but if I'm not included into the list, and there are such people, what do I do? Okay, let me complete the first case, the case when the person is in the register but wants to change the place of voting. The first case, person goes to where the person is registered. The second case is when the person submits application at a place of actual work or study. If the person is in Kiev, the person submits such an application to the body in Kiev with the document which would confirm why the person wants to change this place of voting. Then this application is considered and the decision is made. Electronically, you will get the information that you are included into the voting list at the place of your actual residence. But please understand us correctly. That's not that someone is creating some obstacles for you artificially, but you need to prove that you have some serious grounds to change the place of voting. If people, you know, like, I don't want to vote here, I want to vote there, and if they start changing these places, that would be a mess. I would like I would like our situation to be like in France, but in France they can change the place for voting only once a year, once in 365 days. But basically, in our case, people on the day of voting go to the polling stations and then they demand that their name is introduced into the list. Now, a specific case when the person is not included into the register. In this case, I would recommend to go to this body which is registering the voters with the application, with request to be included into this register. For example, if this is in Kiev and the people don't want to introduce you into the list, just tell us which body refuses to include you into the register. The next question will be in English.
Oh no. I'd like to come back to Donetsk and ask you about the microphone. If about the hundreds of thousands of ballot papers of some referendum, I do not consider them ballot papers. This is the same as if we go and print out something and do a stamp, make a step about the, for instance, Book Lovers Society, stamp those papers and say that those are ballot papers. This will have the same legal effects, about the same as the case that you are mentioning about seizing part of the papers. I think that if law enforcement bodies are taking their action, I think that those are legal, but I think that those respective sheets of paper I would not treat as ballot papers, because ballot paper is the document that is being made according to certain procedures.
Harvey Carroll from America. Again, we have seen a handful of Russian flag wavers hold an illegal referendum. In my opinion, it clearly shows that you've lost portions of the city and regional administrative buildings that hold huge majority of the election records. I was trying to think of ways to prevent violence leading up to the May 25th election and avoid corruption as well. My question is, could elections be held at well-established faith-based organizations such as churches, synagogues, and so forth? These facilities have a long standing as being place of peace throughout history. Perhaps a week-long voting option, downloadable form that anyone could download. However, they have to Xerox a copy of their passport, city passport, verified by election monitors to ensure that no double voting, and that could be collated and collected and verified after. They could simply pray before they vote. Do you feel that this is a potential option, or at least study this option with a working group?
Так, цікаве питання.
Yes, a very interesting question, but I'd like to emphasize that according to many sociological surveys, the highest trust in Ukrainian society is paid to two institutions, church and the army. I respect all the confessions, no exclusion, but you should also remember that Ukraine is a polyconfessional state, and it will be hard to find any parity in this case, but on a more professional level, I'd like to emphasize that to organize the election, the all-Ukrainian referendum, for instance, if there are grounds to do this, only respective commissions can do this. The commissions formed from individuals and commissions that would, as bodies, have the trust from the society. You know how to satisfy the interests of terrorists. The world practice shows that there's no way to satisfy the interests of terrorists. Yes, you can talk to separatists, and many countries of the world saw such issues. You can also respect them, you can understand them, or you cannot understand them, but if people are for for the loss of part of the, for the dissolving of part of the territory without arms, then it's okay. But if people have weapons in their hands, you would not be able to interest them with anything, even if you invite leaders of churches or confessions to this. I am very skeptical about this way to hold elections and solve this problem. Believe me, the way to provide for the security and safety of territorial election commissions and polling stations in Donetsk and Luhansk region and elsewhere, this is the best way, and I am sure that the Council for National Security and Defense and other law enforcement bodies are looking for the answer. I think that this will be done in the most efficient way, and if there's a need to change the law on the election of the president, let's change the law. But there is no alternative to the elections as such, and any way to move in time the process of the elections, this is talk about nothing. The elections have to happen on the entire territory of Ukraine, including Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Of course, we are not insured against the fact that at some polling stations the voting won't happen on because of some reasons, but we should try to do this in a purely legal way. If we come away from the procedures, then there will be a question about the legality of the vote on some polling stations or in some territorial district electoral districts, because we will be told, see, you have approached this in a too creative way. I think that every step should be checked against the legislation.
Please tell us about those problematic regions. You say it's very difficult to form commissions there. In some places commissions are not formed. How are you planning to get votes from there? Do you expect to get any reaction from there? Do I answer in Russian or in Ukrainian? Then I will be answering in Ukrainian, but I would like to emphasize, I mentioned the statistical data for some of the regions, Donetsk and Lugansk regions. In Lugansk, only in one constituency the commission is not formed. In Donetsk, out of 22 in 8, the commissions are not formed. You see that the majority of constituencies formed their commissions. How will they be transferring or passing these bulletins to the constituency commissions? Maybe there will be some additional security provided in these regions of Ukraine, but all the procedures according to the law on presidential elections will be implemented. I don't want to emphasize again and again where even if the elections do not take place in some number of polling stations, but the elections will be held. Everyone knows that the number of polling stations where the problems might be should be minimum, and I believe that all the law enforcers understand us, the Ministry of the Interior, the Security Service. We will request them and as well as the National Security and Defense Council to control that, so that the work of our colleagues in the polling stations and constituency stations so that people there can work. We live in the time that we live, but in this situation we need to consider the reality. Radio Kiev, could you please tell, it has been mentioned that there will be a record number of foreign observers. Can you tell us how many of them are you expecting to be in Kiev? How many foreign observers there will be in Kiev? I would like to say that the Central Election Commission registers international observers. These are either from the foreign states or foreign organizations, international organizations, and they are registered in one place where they go to observe the elections. We do not limit where they go, and the same way the polling stations do not have to provide information about where they go, and so we do not have the information, specific information about where, in which region of Ukraine, how many observers will be. But I can tell you that we have 814 international observers registered, out of them 758 from international organizations and 56 from foreign states. We expect that this number will be even higher from OSCE. We expect to have many of so-called short-term observers, so they will arrive 4 or 5 days in advance, and preliminary we had the information that their number will be about 900, and probably there will be additionally some other international observers registered, but again I cannot tell you how many of them will be in specific regions of Ukraine. And a few more. Ukrainian radio, please tell us how will you ensure the security at the polling stations and during the transportation of the bulletins. This will be done by the law enforcement bodies, the Ministry of the Interior, maybe other law enforcement bodies. How this will be done according to the procedure in detail, I will not tell you, not just because I do not know. In fact, I do not know that. But even if I knew, believe me, this information is not such which has to be made public, and you understand why. I do hope that the National Security and Defense Council, the Ministry of the Interior and the Security Service, they understand how important that is, how important is the issue of the security in general, and I hope that this issue will be resolved. Another question in English.
Hi, Kim Vanel from Al Jazeera. Apologies if this has already been asked. I realise it's not entirely your domain, but Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov today said that practical implementation of the results of the referendum in the East would lead to better dialogue between Kiev and the regions. Again, I realise this is not entirely your domain, but do you have any response?
That is basically more in the domain of the President, of the Cabinet of Ministers, of the Parliament of Ukraine. But I cannot tell that that is my position as the citizen of Ukraine. I cannot tell that there's no dialogue. There's a dialogue between Kiev and regions of Ukraine. But the issue is that some citizens of Ukraine and some regions of Ukraine should not be blackmailing the whole territory of Ukraine, putting forward some conditions about the dual language, about some other issues. These are certain issues which are to be resolved by the certain authorities, and they will be resolved. But several of these issues are artificial. Like an issue of what should be the official status of the languages in Ukraine. According to all sociological surveys, this is important for voters of Ukraine, but in the rating of importance, they are somewhere on the 15th or 20th place, talking about the priorities. Also, well, of course, we are concerned, people are concerned with the peace in Ukraine. But I do believe that all our neighbors, everyone, wants peace to be in Ukraine. Any other question?
Родовый Courier newspaper. The attitude of the Central Electoral Commission to sue the referendums is understandable, but still there is information in the internet that 75% of population voted in favor of Donetsk Republic, took part in the voting, and almost 80% were in favor of Donetsk, and that more than 2.5 million people voted for the single, united Ukraine. I understand as a journalist that it is most probably fake, but there are people who read this and believe this. Can you refute or corroborate these figures, or has the Central Electoral Commission just pay no attention to this? Well, you can quote different figures, and as far as 80% is concerned, I think that those people were a bit ashamed. Why not say 99%, as this was during the Soviet times? But any figure that they quote have no significance. They are taken, as we say, from the ceiling. Those figures do not pertain to any procedure. I have emphasized already that the procedure of referendum provides for several stages, and the stages are consecutive in their logic. And any referendum should be organized by commissions, and any commission should have some authority gained through the legal acts. And in this case, if we are talking about the events, about the imitation of the so-called referendum on the 11th of May, we may hear all sorts of figures, and I would not pay attention to this. I'd like to emphasize once more, from the point of view of law, the events of the 11th May do not have any legal effects. Thank you, Mr. Magera, for and they can have legal effects as far as criminal responsibility is concerned, according to the criminal code of Ukraine, but from the point of view of the constitution of Ukraine and legitimization of those results, they don't have any significance. If you have any other questions, you can ask Mr. Magera in the corridor. I emphasize once more that I leave here some statistical information, and if you are interested, I guess you can read this information. It's dated today's morning. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Andriy Magera, Deputy Chairman of the Central Election Commission of Ukraine. Our next be Uliana Suprun, Director of Humanitarian Initiatives, Ukraine World Congress. Together with her, there will be Christina Whaler from Canada-Ukraine Foundation, Artem Mirgorodsky, Chairman of the NGO Initiative E+, and Nadia Galimbievska, NGO Ukraine Association of Specialists in Overcoming the Consequences of Traumatic Events. Their briefing is going to take place at 1 o'clock. Thank you.